A startling and significant revelation today by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. He says Canada's intelligence agents have heard a recording of the killing of Jamal Khashoggi. The Saudi journalist disappeared after entering a Saudi consulate in Istanbul in early October. Trudeau is the first Western leader to confirm his security officials have listened to the tape, but he says he has not personally heard it. The CBC's Tom Perry is traveling with the Prime Minister and has the latest for us. Tom?
Vashi, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says Canadian intelligence agencies have heard a recording of the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Khashoggi was, of course, killed inside the embassy of Saudi Arabia in Turkey. The Saudis originally denied he was dead. They then changed their story. They said he died in a fight. Turkish authorities say Khashoggi was brutally murdered by a Saudi hit squad. The Turkish president has said in the past few days that his government has a recording of Khashoggi's death and that he's shared that recording with the U.S. and with other countries. Justin Trudeau was asked today whether Canadian authorities had heard this recording, and he says they have. Here's what the Prime Minister said today in Paris.
Canada's intelligence agencies have been working very closely on this issue with the Turkish intelligence. Canada has been fully briefed up on what Turkey had to share. We continue to be engaged with our allies on the investigation into accountability for the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, and we are in discussions with our like-minded allies as to next steps towards Saudi Arabia.
Now, just to be clear, I did ask Justin Trudeau twice whether that means Canadian intelligence agents have heard this recording, and he said they have, but that he hasn't, though the Prime Minister's office says he has been fully briefed. Now, Trudeau didn't say whether this information changes the way Canada sees its deal to sell armored vehicles to Saudi Arabia. He would only say today that Canada remains in discussions with its allies about the investigation into Khashoggi's death and what they should do next about Saudi Arabia. Now, Trudeau was also asked about trade today. He did speak with U.S. President Donald Trump during his trip to Paris. He says that he and Trump did speak about U.S. tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, and he says Trump told him he wants to keep moving toward building a positive relationship on trade. And Trudeau did not say today whether lifting those U.S. tariffs would be a condition for Canada officially signing on to that new Canada-U.S.-Mexico free trade agreement. Vashi?
Thanks, Tom. The CBC's Tom Perry traveling with the Prime Minister. So how significant is it that Canada's intelligence officials have heard the Khashoggi tape, and what effect could it have on this country's relationship with Saudi Arabia? Here with some answers is Middle East political analyst and senior fellow at the Center for International Governance Innovation in Waterloo, Basma Momani. Hi, Professor Momani. Great to see you again.
Likewise.
Thank you so much for your time. So let me just start off with that question. How significant is this revelation from your perspective?
Well, it's significant because no other world leader has really admitted that there's a tape, of course, other than Erdogan himself of Turkey. Everybody else has been coy about it. Certainly there have been leaks to various newspapers from inside officials, but certainly no other world leader of Justin Trudeau's stature has admitted that there is indeed a tape. Whether it's audio or video, we don't know, but nevertheless, that's obviously a game changer, I think, in the overall investigation, of course, and in the feeling that, of course, the Saudis have something to hide, which is what Erdogan has been dangling in front of the Saudis for some time now.
The Canadian press is reporting that it was the director of CSIS, David Vigneault, who traveled to Turkey, listened to the audio tapes, and provided a briefing to the Prime Minister's upon his return. What does that tell you about, I guess, the federal government's efforts in trying to ascertain the details of this?
Well, I think it probably notes that we were, as a part of the Five Eyes, as an intelligence community of the U.S., UK, Australia, New Zealand, are probably the countries that Erdogan was referring to just yesterday about having heard these tapes. So I think this is probably the community he was referring to, the allies, so to speak. The fact that he also didn't trust to just share this with the Americans, I think, is very interesting. The fact that Erdogan wanted others in the room to have also heard it, including Canada, of course, is, again, another significant development. Again, very, very interesting, broader geopolitical issues resulting from this. But one thing that stands out to me is that this is a very high-level confirmation that tapes exist.
Closer to home, what are the implications for the federal government here? Now they've admitted that someone, the director of CSIS has heard the tapes. You can't unhear whatever's on those tapes. What does that mean for what kind of action they end up taking and the timeline for that action?
Yeah, and I know many people are looking at, this LAV deal with the Saudis. Of course, the government, I think, in its interest, doesn't want to open that chapter again. They certainly have already made it very clear that there are billions of dollars, if not more, in losses if there is a cancellation of that. Certainly the business community doesn't want to see that canceled. And more importantly, you have the reality that we're, coming into an election next year. So everybody wants this to go away at the political level, of course, not including, parties like the NDP and certainly the Canadian people who have already, I think, resoundingly been very against this deal. But I think there's not going to be a lot of change on that key bilateral issue. But I think certainly for a broader geopolitical debate and question about this murder, it just got more interesting.
You noted off the top there that of course, the Prime Minister is the first Western leader. Other countries have been more cagey with it. What are you reading into the world's reaction at this stage? I think the last time you were on was about 2 weeks ago. The pressure was sort of at a maximum, the level of public scrutiny at a maximum. That has somewhat dissipated. What are you reading into how the world is reacting right now, and what are you looking to see?
Yeah, I think, the real sort of capturing the imagination of the world's attention around the Khashoggi case has probably gone away, not to take away, of course, the significance of the murder. There is, I think, good focus on Saudi role in Yemen. And of course, we've seen in the United States with the new House, that means that in the Democrats' control, that means that there may be renewed emphasis on perhaps stopping some of the arms sales to Saudi Arabia. There's certainly a lot more criticism. General Mattis has already announced that they're going to stop refueling U.S. planes that take, action or that take part in bombing of Yemen, I should say Saudi planes. But of course, that doesn't mean that they're not helping on logistics, intelligence, and other factors. So, there may be mounting criticism of the Saudi war in Yemen, and that's a good thing, seeing the humanitarian crisis there. But I'm afraid to say everything else is probably stay the same.
So you don't think Canada and its allies will take any sort of action based on the Khashoggi case specifically?
I wish I was more optimistic. Perhaps I'm a realist as a political scientist, and that, I think that the fact that you have Saudi Arabia being the largest importer of arms in the world is just too lucrative to give up for many Western countries. I think many just want to get away with being able to tell their public and their audience that they've done something, a little slap on the wrist, if you will, to the Saudis, and continue to do business with Saudi Arabia. And one could very much take a strong moral stand that that's not the right thing to do, but I think that's pretty much the politics of it.
What do you think the implications are of that? Do you think, for example, the leadership in Saudi Arabia remains untested and unchanged? Things like this could happen again. What do you think the consequences are, if that does end up being the case?
Yeah, sure, and absolutely. And don't forget here, the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, is like 32, 33. We never really know because the age keeps changing depending on how old they want to make him sound. But nevertheless, he's young. And as many have been reckoning with, if there is no challenge to his power, we're in for 50 years of this Crown Prince. And the past 5 years under his de facto rule has been pretty horrendous. We've seen some awful things happen. So absolutely, we're in for a very rough ride with Saudi Arabia for a very long time.
You've also spoken before on the show about the sort of nuanced view on Turkey's role in all of this and how it's not as perhaps the Turkish government purports it to be, or as pure as the government purports it to be. Trudeau said today, the Prime Minister said today, that he thanked Turkey's President Erdogan for, quote, his strength in responding to this case. What did you think of that?
Well, I think he has to say that. Of course, Turkey is a NATO ally. One can't ignore that relationship. But at the same time, I think, as Turkey has taken the case of Jamal Khashoggi to the highest levels, and I'm grateful that they did, let's not forget there are 50,000 people inside Turkish prisons, including the largest number of reporters and journalists are in Turkish prisons. So, he really can't, Erdogan can't really ride the high moral ground here. There's just too much inconsistency there.
And before I let you go, as far as the actual Saudi investigation in Khashoggi goes, what is the latest on that? And do you ever expect there to be some sort of conclusion to it or follow up on it?
I mean, quite simply, the Saudis are trying to basically let the clock run and hopefully everybody ignore this. They've said that they're having an internal investigation. There's plenty of circumstantial evidence and including enormous amount of internal leaks that suggest that, this is really came from the highest level, including people that were right-hand men to the young crown prince. But they've insulated the young crown prince from being in any way culpable. And that, of course, is something that suits the Saudi regime, but means that real justice is probably not going to be served.
Okay, I'm out of time. I have to leave it there. But thank you so much, Professor Momani. Appreciate your insight.
Thank you.